Now, during an election year, the media in any country plays a critical role in disseminating information to the electorate in order to facilitate informed decision-making where citizens finally head to the poll to make that crucial mark on the ballot paper. Now, the organisation Media Monitoring Africa has monitored every single democratic election in this country to help hold the media, us, accountable to the highest ethical principles. And 2019, I guess, was no different, this year marking 25 years of a democratic South Africa and the sixth election held since the birth of our Rainbow Nation in 1994. And now the scorecard is out. How did local media organisations do in reporting on the election? Thandi Smith is with us, as well as Azola Daile from MMA to give us the verdict. To both of you, a very warm welcome. Azola, let me start with you and let's talk about the stories that were covered. You make the point the results show the propensity of South African media to discuss and examine more politicised issues over those that citizens might see as important. Is that a criticism?
Not necessarily criticism, because in these particular elections we saw quite a rise in citizen voices than in previous elections. So that, on a start, is a very good point. But still, by and large, the voices are still very much political. So we had coverage checking internal political party dynamics, party political campaigns, but we heard little about, citizen-centered issues like, for instance, HIV and AIDS.
All right, citizen-centered issues. Let's put up a graph here if we can, or a graphic. So those were the stories that we looked at.
Definitely.
And the point that you're making is that there was a propensity of party political issues over some of the more important issues, for instance, like service delivery.
Yes, definitely. So that is the issue, that as much as we see, in this instance, the coming in of citizen-centered issues into the top 5 of what has been reported, we see that it's still lagging behind party political,
Thandi Smith, I get it, okay, but speaking on the media side of things, the party political stuff is often the most interesting. It's the newest, it's the freshest, it's the most dynamic, it's the most compelling, as opposed to service delivery, which is an issue which is absolutely critical. But as you rightly say, it's a recurring issue.
As a country, as a nation, we very politically obsessed. We cover our politicians often. We cover what's going in our political parties. But I think what's really concerning is if you look at the graph, if you notice that little dotted line at the bottom, that's not a graphical error.
I was going to say, it's not a typo somewhere, is it? Yeah, what is that?
That is actually the percentage of stories that are your lesser-known topics, such as HIV/AIDS, education, migration issues. Exactly. So you're looking at between 0 and 2% of stories coming in on those topics, and that to me is concerning.
Having said that, though, those issues are often discussed by ordinary South Africans. So let's put up another graphic now, something that you call citizen voices. And the rise in this and the engagement, their engagement with the media was commendable. So on the one hand, there might have been a deficit in reporting the important issues, but the media generally were talking to people about those issues. Talk us through this one.
Citizen Voices has come in at the second most sources accessed.
Citizen Voices, just to clarify, are issues that worry you and me?
Well, no, it's actually physically accessing on-the-ground voices. So it's interviews, it's bringing in citizen sources into stories. So what we often see, and what we've seen in the past, is that politicians get sourced the most, and political parties, as we see with these results. So political parties has the highest amount of sources accessed. So for us, it's about whose voices do we hear, who holds the power of the narrative within the media. And it's the first time that citizen voices have appeared as the second highest accessed voice in articles, which is a very positive result.
A negative, though, is the share of voice, you say, remains unequal. Men, on average, being accessed 4 times more than women. That's not fair, is it?
It's not fair at all. It's not fair at all, particularly considering that, there were 2 million more women registered to vote than men in these particular elections, and the fact that I think women make up more than 1% more than men in terms of populations when it was last counted in 2016. So that's very alarming when to find in the media now that voices are concentrated towards men, 80%, but that could be attributed to a whole lot of things also.
Such as what?
As well, such as political parties not putting women in front.
I mean, the irony is 2 men are talking about this.
I mean, I'm just sitting here.
Unfortunately. definitely. And also, journalists themselves in terms of who they want to access. You understand that in political parties, the big players are usually the men. So the women, take up deputizing roles and whatnot, and they are not big for stories. So, for instance, you'll just go for it, definitely. So there are many issues.
Well, the reality is that we still live in a very patriarchal society where media often tend to access men more. Now, these results aren't very different to your average global trends around female versus male voices in the media. You sort of get the between 18, 22, 23% of female voices in any sort of given topic, which is alarming. And it seems that elections are no different in this case. I think that we are seeing a slight increase sometimes, but it's not good enough.
You also say that the media did, and I quote you, that includes us, an extraordinary job in covering the top 5 South African political parties. The interesting thing, and I suppose it's obvious, though, is that there was a direct correlation between the coverage and how things eventually ended. Let's have a look and see how we did. So, the ANC... Well, talk us through the 2 graphs, first of all. 58 versus 53, what are those? One's media coverage, one is vote received. So pretty much on a par, huh?
Definitely on par. As you've quoted, the media did a really good job in this instance. I think they're also following the ICASA regulations around reporting in an election period where it has to be proportionate to, the votes that people receive. So media really did a good job in this instance. If I could speak on...
That doesn't really differ from other... You're going to talk about the Freedom Front Plus, I know.
And
this doesn't really differ from other elections, though, does it, Thandi? Then we'll get to the Freedom Front Plus.
No,
not
not necessarily. And what you usually find is that media do tend to follow regulations quite well during the election period. So we do tend to follow the equitable coverage. Yeah. There's often during a period, and even now, we saw a lot of outcry around, well, why is ANC getting so much coverage? And, to the detriment of much smaller parties. But given the huge task at hand that media had with the 48 registered parties, we think that this was a good performance.
But that's the one issue. But now let's look at the smaller political parties. I think you want to reference the Inkatha Freedom Party and the Freedom Front Plus, yeah?
Yes. For the Inkatha Freedom Party, actually, they didn't see a rise from prior elections in terms of media coverage. But in terms of seats, of course, they saw the seats moving from 10 to 14 seats. And with the Freedom Fund Plus, we also saw a rise in their report coverage as well as their seats. But that could also be attributed to the fact that they were quite in the media a lot in recent days, the land debate that is currently going on, and the so-called farm murders that are said to be plaguing South Africa. So that could explain why we saw a media rise in reportage around FF Plus, particularly around this time during elections.
All right, Thandi, final question to you. If you compare this election to previous elections, did the media, in other words, all of us, did we do better or worse?
Well, I think it's safe to say you did better. Quite in line with what was expected. But the fact that we see an increase in citizen voices is a good thing. The fact that we see the top 5 topics of media being a slightly lower total percentage at 45%, whereas in comparison to about 70-80% in previous years, that's a positive thing. So although there is room for improvement always, I think it is safe to say that media did do a good job.
We'll take that. Thank you very much for joining us, Media Monitoring Africa. You can weigh in on this story and the other stories on today's program on our various social media platforms. Until next time, goodbye to you, and thank you for watching.